If you sign this, you become my husband by Friday, and nobody can know why. Mason Reed said it so calmly that for one ridiculous second, I thought I had misheard him. I sat across from the most famous alpha in America inside a private conference room 38 floors above Los Angeles, trying not to stare at the face I had seen on movie posters, streaming ads, and giant billboards along Sunset Boulevard. Mason looked different without cameras around him. Still handsome, still impossibly composed, but tired in a way magazines never captured. His dark suit was perfect. The shadows beneath his eyes were not. Between us lay a legal contract thick enough to feel like a warning. My name was Noah Bennett, 24 years old, Omega, pastry baker, professional avoider of attention, and currently 12 days away from running out of the only suppressant my body could safely tolerate. Standard formulas made me dangerously sick. The rare medication my specialist prescribed cost almost $7,000 a month and had become nearly impossible to obtain through normal insurance. I had sold my car, drained my savings, taken extra bakery shifts, and moved into the cheapest studio apartment I could find within bus distance of work. None of it was enough. I had spent months hiding how desperate things had become because being an unbonded Omega with unstable access to suppressants attracted exactly the kind of attention I did not want. Then a discreet attorney contacted me about a private marital arrangement. I had assumed it was a scam until I walked into the room and found Mason Reed waiting. His problem was different from mine, but apparently just as urgent. Mason's late father had built Reed Entertainment into one of the largest independent film and music companies in the country. The family trust required Mason to establish a legal household before his 31st birthday or temporary voting control would pass to his uncle, Grant Reed, until the board could appoint a permanent successor. Mason had ignored the clause for years. Grant had not. With Mason's birthday less than a month away, his uncle had gathered enough board allies to turn a temporary transfer into something much harder to reverse. Mason needed a spouse quickly, privately, and preferably someone outside Hollywood. I needed money, medical access, and enough protection to keep my condition from becoming public knowledge. On paper, we were perfect for each other's emergencies. In reality, we were strangers. Why me? I asked. Mason's attorney stopped organizing papers, but Mason answered directly. Because you have no public profile. That cannot be the only reason. His gray-blue eyes held mine. You also refused the first offer. I shifted in my chair. The first proposal had included more money than I had ever seen. I had turned it down because the medical control clause allowed his staff to manage my treatment schedule. I do not like people making decisions about my body. I noticed. And yet I am sitting here. Because the revised contract removes that clause. I looked down. He was right. My doctor remained mine. My prescriptions remained private. Mason's team would provide access and security, not control. That mattered more than the money. What do you get? I asked. A legal marriage. Enough stability to block Grant's challenge. 1 year without scandal. You picked the wrong Omega if you want someone obedient. For the first time, the corner of Mason's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close. Good. Obedient people are usually expensive in ways money cannot fix. That answer unsettled me more than arrogance would have. I picked up the pen. One more condition. Tell me. No pretending in private. If this is business, then we say what we mean when the cameras are gone. Mason studied me for several seconds. Agreed. I signed Noah Bennett beneath the final paragraph. Mason signed beside me with the same effortless signature fans paid hundreds of dollars to own. His attorney exhaled in relief and reached for the contract. Then Mason's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and went completely still. What happened? I asked. He turned the phone toward me. A celebrity alert had appeared less than 30 seconds earlier. Mason Reed secretly engaged to unknown Omega, emergency wedding rumored. My stomach dropped. We have not even left the building. Exactly. Another notification appeared. This one was not from the press. It was a private message sent directly to my phone from an unknown number. I opened it, and every bit of warmth disappeared from my hands. Congratulations, Noah. I hope Mason knows what your medicine costs. I looked up at him. Mason was no longer tired. He was focused, cold, and very awake. Nobody outside this room was supposed to know about your medication, he said. I swallowed. Then somebody already knows more about this marriage than we do. By the next morning, Mason had tried to solve my life 3 different ways, and I had rejected every single one. The first attempt arrived before sunrise, when a black SUV stopped outside my apartment building and a security officer informed me that Mr. Reed had arranged transportation until the leak was contained. I stared at the polished vehicle, then at the city bus approaching the corner. Tell Mr. Reed I already have transportation. I boarded the bus. 20 minutes later, Mason called. You refused the car. Excellent observation. Someone accessed private information about you. That does not mean I need an SUV following me to work. Silence. Then he said, it was not following you. It was driving you. That distinction probably sounds better in Hollywood. I hung up before he could answer. His second attempt appeared at the bakery around 9. I was glazing honey rolls when my manager carried a refrigerated package into the kitchen. Inside were 3 boxes of my suppressant medication, enough for several months. For one dangerous second, relief nearly overwhelmed every other thought. Then I saw the receipt. Mason had paid for everything through a private medical service. I called him immediately. Take it back. No. That was not a request. Noah, you have 12 days left. And I have my own prescription order pending. The pharmacy told my medical coordinator there could be another delay. My hand tightened around the phone. Why was your medical coordinator calling my pharmacy? Mason went quiet. To make sure you had what you needed. We changed the contract because I told you I would manage my own treatment. I did not change your treatment. You went around me. I solved a problem. You created another one. The bakery suddenly felt too warm. I lowered my voice. I agreed to marry you. I did not agree to become a project. Mason answered after a pause. Keep the medication until your order arrives. No. Noah. Goodbye, Mason. I returned the boxes unopened. His third attempt was somehow worse. When my shift ended, I found him waiting outside the bakery wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a jacket that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. Even disguised, Mason Reed looked like someone trying very hard not to look famous. You came here? I asked. You stopped answering your phone. That usually means stop calling. I am beginning to understand that. Are you? He removed his sunglasses. Without them, I noticed the exhaustion beneath his eyes again. My security team traced the message sent to you. It came through an anonymous relay, but whoever sent it knew about the contract before the leak reached the press. My irritation cooled. Grant? Possibly. Or someone helping him. Mason glanced toward the street. That is why I want you somewhere safer. Your house. Yes. I laughed once. Of course. There are gates, private security, and no reporters. There are also probably 20 bedrooms and a refrigerator that judges poor people. Mason blinked. My refrigerator does not judge anyone. That was a joke. I know. He clearly had not. Despite myself, I almost smiled. Then he held out a key card. Guest suite. Separate floor. You control access. I did not take it. You still do not understand. Then explain it. Something in his voice stopped me. There was no command this time. Just frustration and, beneath it, genuine confusion. Every time I tell you I have a problem, you buy something, I said. A car. Medication. A place to stay. You never ask what would actually make me comfortable. Mason looked at the key card in his hand. Money fixes most problems people bring me. I am not bringing you problems. I am telling you where my boundaries are. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Traffic moved behind him. Somewhere inside the bakery, a mixer started humming. Finally Mason put the key card away. All right. What would make you comfortable? The question surprised me enough that I answered honestly. Knowing who has my medical information. Knowing whether your uncle is behind this. And getting through Friday without becoming entertainment for the entire country. Mason nodded slowly. Those are reasonable. Thank you. You should still take the car. I stared at him. His mouth twitched. I am learning slowly. Very slowly. This time he actually smiled. Then his phone rang. The smile vanished when he saw the screen. He answered, listened for less than 10 seconds, and looked directly at me. We have another problem. What now? The courthouse received a request for our marriage license before we even filed it. A chill moved through me. Our private civil ceremony was scheduled for Friday morning, and only 4 people knew the location. Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice. Someone is not just watching the press, Noah. Someone knows our legal schedule. Before I could respond, my own phone buzzed. Another anonymous message appeared. Friday is too late. Ask Mason what happens to Reed Entertainment if he is still unmarried tomorrow night. By noon the next day, I was legally married to Mason Reed, and by 7 that evening, half of Los Angeles seemed determined to ask whether I had done it for money. Everything happened faster than I could process. The anonymous message had exposed something Mason's attorney had apparently missed. Grant Reed had called an emergency board session for Thursday night, 24 hours before our original courthouse appointment. If Mason entered that meeting unmarried, Grant could trigger the temporary control provision before our Friday ceremony ever happened. So the schedule changed. A judge approved a private civil ceremony that morning. There were no flowers, no music, no family photographs. Mason wore a charcoal suit. I wore the best navy jacket I owned. We signed the license, exchanged the legally required words, and became husbands in less than 15 minutes. Mason did not touch me without asking. When the judge told us we could shake hands instead of performing anything more personal, Mason looked at me and said quietly, "Your choice." I offered my hand. His fingers were warm and careful around mine. That should have been the strangest moment of my day. It was not. Reed Entertainment had a major movie premiere that evening, and Mason could not cancel without making the sudden marriage look even more suspicious. His public relations team wanted me beside him on the red carpet. I refused twice. Then Mason surprised everyone by saying, "He does not have to go." No argument. No attempt to persuade me with money. He had actually listened. That was probably why I changed my mind. I told myself I was protecting the agreement. In truth, I was curious about the man who had finally learned how to ask. The premiere took place at a historic theater on Hollywood Boulevard, where barricades held back hundreds of fans and photographers. I heard Mason's name before our car door opened. The sound rolled down the street like thunder, followed by camera shutters and shouted questions. Mason stepped out first, instantly becoming someone else. His tiredness vanished behind an effortless smile. His shoulders straightened. Every movement looked controlled, practiced, almost unreal. Then he turned back toward me and held out his hand. He did not reach inside the car. He simply waited. I took it. The noise doubled. "Noah, look here." Mason, when did you meet? Is the marriage real? Noah, how much are you being paid? That last question made my steps falter. Another voice followed. Did Mason cover your medical expenses? My stomach dropped. Someone had leaked more than the engagement. Mason felt my hand tense. He stopped walking. His public relations manager immediately whispered, "Keep moving." Mason ignored her. He turned toward the reporters, and the polished movie star smile disappeared. His medical information is private, he said. The crowd quieted enough for me to hear him clearly. If someone provided you with confidential health information, the appropriate response is not to use it to embarrass him. A reporter pushed another question. But are you paying for his treatment? Mason's expression became colder. Noah is my husband, not a financial statement. My husband. The words landed differently now that they were legally true. Another reporter called out, "So this is not a business arrangement?" I expected Mason to give the answer his public relations team had prepared. Instead, he looked at me first. Do you want to answer that? I almost laughed from pure disbelief. Yesterday he had tried to send a car, medication, and a guest suite into my life without permission. Tonight, in front of hundreds of cameras, he gave me control of the sentence that mattered most. We are not discussing private terms, I said. But I am here because I chose to be. Mason's gaze stayed on mine for one beat longer than necessary. Then we continued inside. The ballroom beyond the theater lobby was quieter, filled with actors, executives, sponsors, and people who greeted Mason as if they had known him forever. I started noticing things I had never seen on television. He remembered the name of an elderly usher. He thanked every server who approached us. He quietly moved away from a group of producers when one of them started mocking a nervous young assistant. None of it seemed designed for cameras. That bothered me, because it made him harder to dismiss as an arrogant celebrity with too much money. Later, while Mason stepped away for an interview, an older actress named Diane Holloway sat beside me. You are looking at him like you are trying to solve a puzzle, she said. Maybe I am. She smiled. Mason has spent 15 years being surrounded by people who already decided who he is. Curiosity might be good for him. Before I could ask what she meant, my phone vibrated. Another anonymous message appeared, this time with a photograph attached. Mason was leaving a private medical research clinic 3 months earlier, long before we had met. Beneath it was a single sentence. Ask your husband why he was researching your suppressant before he ever knew your name. I waited until the premiere ended before asking Mason why he had been researching my suppressant 3 months before he supposedly knew I existed, but the answer I received made my own secret suddenly impossible to keep. We were in the back seat of his car, moving through Los Angeles after midnight, when I handed him my phone. Mason studied the photograph without denying it. That clinic receives funding from my father's medical foundation, he said. I went there because Grant was trying to remove the program from the family trust. The suppressant program? Among others. I searched his face for hesitation and found none. So you did not know about me? Noah, until my attorney showed me your file, I had never heard your name. Relief came first. Guilt followed immediately. I turned toward the window. Then there is something you need to know about mine. Mason waited. Somehow that made it worse. Bennett is my mother's last name. I started using it 4 years ago. His expression sharpened. What name did you use before? Noah Mercer. The silence changed. Mason knew it. Anyone connected to Reed Entertainment would. Daniel Mercer had been the company's chief financial officer until an internal investigation ended his career 6 years earlier. He was also my father. Daniel Mercer is your father, Mason said. Yes. I forced myself to keep going. He was accused of hiding millions of dollars in unauthorized transfers. Grant led the internal investigation. My father denied everything, but nobody believed him. My parents separated afterward. I took my mother's name because I wanted a life that had nothing to do with Reed Entertainment. Mason stared at me. I could almost hear the conclusion forming. I had entered a marriage that could determine control of the same company connected to my father's disgrace, and I had never told him. I should have disclosed it before signing, I said. I was afraid you would think I approached you because of my father. Mason's jaw tightened. Did you? No. Did you know Grant was challenging the trust before my attorney contacted you? No. Did your father send you? I have not spoken to him in almost 3 years. Mason leaned back. I prepared myself for anger. Cancellation. Accusations. Instead, he pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Calling my attorney. My stomach dropped. Mason, I understand if you want an annulment. His eyes snapped to mine. Why would I want that? Because I lied to you. You protected a name connected to a scandal that destroyed your family. That is still withholding the truth. Yes, and we will argue about that later. He started typing. Right now I am more interested in why someone selected Noah Bennett for my marriage shortlist when your background check should have identified Noah Mercer immediately. I stared at him. You think somebody knew? I think somebody counted on me finding out at the worst possible moment. The anger I had expected was there, but none of it was aimed at me. Mason called his attorney and ordered a complete audit of the candidate selection process, then instructed his security director to lock down access to my medical records. He never raised his voice. Somehow his calm made the situation feel more serious. If Grant knows who you are, he said after ending the call, the medical leak was not random. He may be building a story that you married me to avenge your father. Then I should disappear from public view. No. Mason, your company is already unstable. And hiding you would make you look guilty. I am not asking you to protect my reputation. He looked at me for a long moment. Maybe I am protecting something because I want to, not because the contract requires it. That sentence unsettled me more than anything else that night. When we reached his house, his attorney was already waiting with an old Reed Entertainment archive file. Mason opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside were copies of the financial transfers blamed on my father. I recognized his signature immediately, but Mason noticed something else. Every suspicious transfer had been approved by a second executive account. The authorization belonged to Grant Reed. Before either of us could speak, Mason's attorney turned another page. There is more. Attached was a confidential memorandum written by Mason's father 6 years earlier. Daniel Mercer may have been telling the truth. I stopped breathing. Mason read the next line aloud. Do not confront Grant until the original accounting ledger is recovered. He looked at his attorney. Where is the ledger? The answer came quietly. According to this memo, your father hid it in an off-site Reed Entertainment Records warehouse 2 weeks before Daniel Mercer was forced to resign. Then my phone buzzed. The anonymous sender had returned with an address and 4 words. Come alone if you want proof. The message said come alone, but Mason had already learned enough about me to know that I would consider it, and I had learned enough about him to know he would never allow that. By sunrise, we were driving toward an old Reed Entertainment Records warehouse nearly 20 miles east of Los Angeles, with Mason's attorney aware of our location and a private security team securing the perimeter without entering the building. Mason had also activated an audio recorder on his phone. You planned for someone to follow us, I said as we approached the loading entrance. I planned for someone to believe we were careless. That answer should have reassured me. Instead, it made my pulse climb. Inside, the warehouse smelled like cardboard, dust, and forgotten years. Rows of metal shelving stretched beneath fluorescent lights, each aisle marked with faded numbers. The address from the anonymous message led us to Section 14. Mason found a banker box labeled with the year my father had been forced out of Reed Entertainment. My hands felt cold as I lifted the lid. Inside were accounting ledgers, printed authorization records, and handwritten notes bearing the signature of Mason's late father. Mason turned pages quickly until he stopped at a set of transfers identical to the ones blamed on Daniel Mercer. "Look at the authorization codes," he said. My father's approval appeared on the first line, but beside it was a second code required for release of the funds. Grant Reed's executive account. The next page showed something even more important. My father had flagged the transfers as suspicious 3 days before they occurred. Someone had overridden his objection and later altered the digital record to make it appear that he initiated them. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. My father was telling the truth. Mason looked at me, and there was no triumph in his expression, only quiet certainty. "Yes." A voice came from the end of the aisle. "Truth is such an inconvenient thing when people find it late." Grant Reed stepped beneath the lights wearing a tailored coat and the calm expression of a man arriving for a business meeting. My first instinct was fear, but Mason barely moved. "You sent Noah the address," he said. Grant smiled. "I wanted him to find what his father never could." "Why?" I asked. "Because the ledger no longer matters." He looked at Mason. "The board already believes your marriage was engineered by the son of a disgraced executive. By noon, every entertainment outlet in the country will believe it too." My stomach dropped. That was the trap. He had wanted us to recover the evidence after poisoning the story around it. Mason surprised me by smiling. "Good." Grant's expression changed slightly. Mason placed his phone on top of the box, the recording indicator clearly visible. "Please keep explaining." Grant stared at the device. "You think a recording changes the board?" "No," Mason said. "The forensic audit does." Grant went still. Mason continued. "My attorney sent copies of these authorization numbers to an independent accounting firm before we entered the warehouse. Your executive codes are already being matched against the archived banking records." I turned toward him. "You knew what was in the box?" I suspected. Grant's confidence finally cracked. "You staged this. I gave you the opportunity to prove whether you were watching us." Mason's voice remained calm. "You came." For the first time, I understood the real reversal. Grant thought he had drawn us into a trap, but Mason had made himself visible precisely so Grant would reveal how closely he was monitoring us. Grant looked at me. "Do not mistake this for protection, Noah. Mason needs you because the marriage keeps his inheritance intact." I expected Mason to argue. Instead, he said, "He is right about one thing." My chest tightened. Mason turned toward me. "The contract began because I needed you." Then his expression softened. "But that stopped being the whole reason days ago." Grant gave a humorless laugh. "How touching." Mason ignored him and opened another envelope hidden beneath the ledger. Inside was an amended trust document signed by his father. His eyes moved across the page, then widened. "What?" I asked. He handed it to me. The clause was clear enough even without a lawyer. If a trustee attempted to invalidate Mason's legal household through improperly obtained confidential information, that trustee's voting authority would be suspended pending independent review, and temporary proxy authority would transfer to Mason's legally recognized spouse. I read it twice. "Mason." He looked from the document to Grant. "You spent weeks trying to use Noah's private medical information to take control of Reed Entertainment." Then he looked back at me. "And if this clause is enforceable, you may have just given Noah the vote that can remove you from power." By 9 the next morning, I was sitting in the Reed Entertainment boardroom with enough temporary voting authority to change the future of a company I had spent years trying to forget. Mason sat beside me, calm beneath a wall of television screens carrying headlines about our marriage, my father, and the warehouse records. Across the table, Grant Reed looked as polished as ever, but the confidence I had seen in the warehouse was gone. Mason's attorney opened the meeting with the independent forensic report. The archived banking records confirmed that my father had flagged the suspicious transfers before they occurred. Grant's executive credentials had authorized the releases, and altered internal files had later shifted responsibility toward Daniel Mercer. Then came the medical leak. Access logs showed that a consultant working for Grant's office had requested information connected to the foundation program that funded my suppressant research. The anonymous messages had been routed through accounts purchased by the same consultant. Grant tried to call it coincidence. Nobody at the table seemed convinced. "This entire meeting is absurd," he said. Noah concealed his identity, entered a rushed marriage, and now somehow controls a proxy vote in the company where his father once worked. I expected Mason to answer, but he looked at me instead. "Your vote," he said quietly. Not his instruction. Not his strategy. Mine. That mattered. I looked around the table. My father spent 6 years carrying blame for transactions he tried to stop. I am not asking this board to trust me because I am Mason's husband. I am asking you to trust your own records. I slid the forensic report forward. And I vote to suspend Grant Reed's authority pending the independent review required by the trust. One by one, other directors voted. When the final count appeared, Grant no longer had enough support to remain in control. He stood without another word and left with his attorneys. I thought that would be the end of the morning. Then Mason's public relations director entered with a tablet. "There are more than 200 reporters downstairs." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because Grant's team released the marriage contract." My stomach turned cold. Within minutes, the entire country would know exactly how our relationship began. The payment. The 1-year term. My medical needs. Mason's inheritance deadline. "We can issue a statement," his public relations director said. "We can say the contract was an early legal framework that no longer reflects the relationship." Mason looked at me. Would that be true? I could not answer. I did not know what we were. Husband was legally accurate. Stranger was no longer accurate. Anything beyond that frightened me. "I do not want you lying for me," I said. Mason nodded. "Then we tell the truth." 30 minutes later, we walked into the lobby together. Camera flashes filled the room. Reporters shouted questions about money, my father, the trust, and whether I had manipulated Mason. He stepped to the microphones. "Yes, our marriage began as an agreement," he said. The room immediately erupted, but he continued. "I needed a legal household to protect my father's company. Noah needed access to medical care and privacy. We both entered the arrangement knowing exactly what it was." Someone shouted, "So you do not love him?" Mason went completely still. I turned toward him. This was where I expected the polished answer, something safe enough for investors and vague enough for headlines. Instead, he looked at me. That was not part of the agreement. The room quieted. "What was not?" a reporter asked. Mason never looked away from me. Caring what happens to him when there is nothing in the contract requiring me to care. My heartbeat stumbled. He continued, his voice steady. "Noah has returned almost every expensive thing I tried to give him. He has argued with me in parking lots, refused my car, sent back medication I bought without permission, and taught me that taking care of someone is not the same as controlling their life." A few reporters laughed softly, but I could barely hear them. "I do not know when this stopped being business," Mason said. "I only know that it did." My throat tightened. "Mason." He stepped away from the microphone and stopped an arm's length from me, leaving the space between us untouched. "I am not asking you to answer me here," he said quietly. "I am only refusing to pretend anymore." For once, there was no celebrity confidence in his face. He looked uncertain. Human. I reached for his hand because I wanted to, and his fingers closed around mine. The cameras exploded with light. Then Mason's attorney hurried through the crowd carrying a sealed envelope. There is something you both need to see. We returned upstairs and opened it in the boardroom. Inside was a letter written by Mason's father shortly before his death. The first page cleared Daniel Mercer by name. The second contained instructions for a medical trust Mason had never known existed. At the bottom, one sentence made my hands shake. If Daniel Mercer is ever vindicated, transfer stewardship of the Omega Treatment Fund to his family. Mason looked at me. I read the sentence again. The foundation controlling the research behind my rare suppressant had apparently been waiting for a Mercer to return. The strange thing about finally being told I could help control the fund behind my own medication was that I did not feel powerful. I felt tired. Mason's father's letter had cleared Daniel Mercer by name, but it also reopened everything I had spent years trying not to think about. My father had lost his career, his reputation, and eventually most of his relationship with me because I believed the story everyone else accepted. Now Reed Entertainment's own records proved he had tried to stop the transfers. I sat in Mason's kitchen that night with the letter in front of me and my phone beside it, staring at my father's old number. Mason stood several feet away, giving me space. "You do not have to call him tonight," he said. "I know. You also do not have to forgive him because the company was wrong." I looked up. "You always have an answer now." "No. I am practicing not having one." That almost made me smile. I finally called. My father answered after the second ring. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said my name the way he used to when I was a kid. "Not Bennett. Mercer. Noah." My throat tightened. "They found the ledger," I said. His breathing changed. "I know. Why did you never show me anything?" "Because every document I had was gone by the time they pushed me out. And because after a while, trying to prove I was innocent started costing me everyone I loved." I closed my eyes. "I thought you stopped trying because you were guilty." "I know." There was no accusation in his voice, and somehow that hurt more. "We did not fix 6 years in one phone call. We did something smaller. We agreed to talk again." When I hung up, Mason quietly placed a mug of tea near me. He did not ask what my father had said. He did not tell me I should feel better. He just sat down across from me. That was when I realized Mason had changed too. A week earlier, he would have tried to solve the pain. Now he simply stayed. The next morning, we met with Dr. Rachel Monroe, the specialist overseeing the Omega treatment program funded through the Mercer Stewardship Trust. She placed 2 medication files on the desk. "The suppressant you currently use is safe for you," she explained, "but it is an older formulation." I frowned. "Older?" "A newer version completed extended trials 5 months ago. It is more stable, easier to manufacture, and designed specifically for patients who react poorly to standard suppressants." I looked at Mason. He looked just as surprised as I felt. Then why was I still paying nearly $7,000 a month? Dr. Monroe sighed. "Because Grant's office froze the distribution budget during the trust dispute. The medication existed, but the assistance program could not legally release it outside the research network." Anger rose in me, but it was different now. Cleaner. Focused. How many people were affected? Hundreds. That answer changed everything. This was no longer about whether Mason could afford my treatment. It was about why anyone should have needed a famous alpha, a marriage contract, or a private connection to access medicine already developed for people like me. Dr. Monroe slid the new prescription toward me. "The board suspension lifted the hold yesterday. Your insurance will cover most of it. The trust covers the rest." I stared at the paper. "So I do not need Mason's money?" Mason answered before she could. "You never needed my permission." I turned toward him. Months of fear seemed to loosen inside my chest all at once. "That is not what I said." His mouth curved. "I am practicing. Outside the clinic, we sat on a bench beneath the bright California sun. I held the new prescription in one hand and the trust documents in the other. I used to think protection meant owing someone, I said. Mason looked toward me. And now? Now I think real protection gives you enough room to stand on your own. He was quiet for a moment. Then I have been doing it wrong. Very wrong. Painfully wrong. Expensively wrong. He laughed, and I did too. Then I placed my hand beside his on the bench. Mason did not immediately take it. He waited until I turned my palm upward. Only then did his fingers close around mine. That night, I moved my medication from the locked case in my bedroom into the main refrigerator. Mason noticed and silently cleared an entire shelf. Do not buy me a special medical refrigerator, I warned. I was not going to. I raised an eyebrow. I was thinking about it. I laughed. My phone rang before I could answer. Dr. Monroe's name appeared on the screen. When I picked up, her voice was unusually serious. Noah, I found one more sealed document attached to the Mercer stewardship file. What kind of document? A beneficiary. Designation signed by Mason's father. I stood straighter. Mason watched my face. Who is the beneficiary? There was a pause. You are. But that is not the surprising part. My grip tightened around the phone. What is? Dr. Monroe lowered her voice. The fund becomes fully independent only if you are no longer financially dependent on Mason Reed. According to the trust, once that happens, your marriage contract can be dissolved without costing either of you the company or the medical program. For the first time since I signed Mason's marriage contract, I had the legal right to walk away without losing my medicine, my financial security, or the future of Reed Entertainment, and that freedom terrified me more than being trapped ever had. Mason's attorney confirmed everything the next morning. The Mercer Treatment Fund was now independent, my medication would remain covered through the trust, and Grant's suspension meant Mason no longer needed our marriage to preserve control of the company. The contract that had brought us together had become unnecessary. Mason listened quietly, then asked the only question that mattered. What does Noah want? His attorney looked surprised. I was not. Mason had finally learned to ask. 3 days later, we sat across from each other in the same conference room where our arrangement had begun. Between us was another document. This one would dissolve the financial terms of our agreement while leaving us free to pursue a simple annulment if we chose. Mason signed first. Then he slid the papers toward me. You are free, he said. I looked at his signature. So are you. I know. You could marry anyone now. A faint smile touched his face. That sounds exhausting. I laughed despite the tightness in my chest. I signed. Just like that, Mason owed me nothing. I owed him nothing. There were no payments, no medical provisions, no inheritance deadlines holding us together. I expected relief. Instead, when I stood to leave, Mason asked, "Can I take you to dinner tonight?" I stared at him. Are you asking your husband on a first date? Apparently I did everything in the wrong order. You married me before buying me dinner. I bought you medication. Which I returned. You are never going to let me forget that. Never. We had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Pasadena where nobody bothered us. Mason did not reserve the entire place. He did not order the most expensive wine. He did not send a driver to collect me. He simply arrived on time and asked what I wanted. That became our new beginning. Weeks passed. My father and I started rebuilding our relationship through Sunday phone calls. The treatment fund expanded access to the new suppressant, and I accepted a position on its patient advisory board while continuing my bakery shifts because I refused to let Mason convince me that waking up before dawn was unreasonable. He still tried. I still ignored him. Then one Saturday morning, He appeared at the bakery before opening wearing an $18 apron with Mason embroidered across the front. "What is that?" I asked. "Personal growth. It is crooked." It was affordable. I laughed so hard I had to put down the tray I was holding. He helped me shape dough for almost an hour and produced the ugliest honey roll I had ever seen. I ate it anyway. 6 months after we dissolved the contract, Mason took me back to the courthouse where we had rushed through our legal ceremony. "I have a problem," he said. "That sentence usually costs me money. Not this time." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten invitation. Sunday. 5 o'clock. The garden behind Mason's house. No press. No business partners. No contract. At the bottom were 4 words. "Marry me for real." I looked up. "Technically, we are still married." "I know." I checked. "Then what exactly are you proposing?" "A wedding we actually choose." My eyes burned unexpectedly. "You could have rented a ballroom. You hate ballrooms. You could have bought something ridiculous. You hate ridiculous gifts." I glanced at the simple silver band in his palm. "You remembered." "I remember everything about you now." Sunday arrived warm and clear. My father stood beside me in Mason's garden. Diane Holloway attended, along with our closest friends, bakery co-workers, Mason's attorney, Dr. Monroe, and a handful of people who had known Mason before fame taught him to hide. There were no cameras except the ones our friends carried. When I reached Mason, he held out his hand but waited. I placed mine in it. "The first time," he said softly, "I married you because I was afraid of losing everything." I smiled. "And now?" His eyes stayed on mine. "Now I know exactly what I would choose if everything else disappeared." We exchanged new vows, not because the law required them, but because we did. When it was my turn, I told him the truth. "You gave me something more important than protection. You gave me the freedom to leave, and then you gave me a reason to stay." Afterward, beneath strings of warm garden lights, Mason leaned close and whispered, "I bought you one wedding gift." I narrowed my eyes. "Mason. It cost $22. That is suspiciously reasonable." He handed me a small bakery box. Inside was one slightly crooked honey roll he had made himself. Beneath it was a folded note. I opened it and read the first line. "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. I am taking my first official shift at your bakery." I looked up in horror. "You cannot even operate the mixer." Mason smiled. "Then you had better teach your husband before I ruin breakfast for half of Los Angeles." 2 years later, Mason still could not make a proper honey roll without turning the kitchen into a disaster, and somehow that had become one of my favorite things about him. Our mornings in Los Angeles were no longer built around contracts, anonymous messages, board votes, or the fear of running out of medicine. They were built around ordinary things. Coffee cooling on the counter. Flour on Mason's black t-shirt. My father calling every Sunday afternoon and pretending he was not emotional whenever I told him the treatment fund had helped another family. The Mercer Stewardship Program had expanded into 14 states, and the newer suppressant formula was now available through regular insurance networks instead of private channels. I still worked part-time at the bakery because I loved it, not because I needed every shift to survive. Mason had stopped arguing with me about that sometime during our first year of real marriage. He had also learned that asking, "Do you want help?" worked much better than announcing, "I already fixed it." That did not mean he had stopped spoiling me. He had simply become better at it. If I came home exhausted, he made tea instead of rearranging my schedule. If I mentioned wanting something, he asked whether I actually wanted him to buy it. Sometimes I said yes. Most of the time I said no. He still looked offended when I rejected expensive gifts, but now he usually replaced them with something ridiculous and small, like a $7 mug that said "World's Most Patient Husband," which was objectively false. Mason's career had grown even bigger, but fame no longer seemed to own every inch of him. He still walked red carpets, starred in major films, and disappeared for weeks on location, but when he came home, he left the public version of himself at the door. The Mason millions of people knew was polished and impossible to reach. My Mason forgot where he left his phone, burned pancakes, complained about early bakery shifts, and once spent 40 minutes trying to repair a cabinet hinge before admitting he had installed it backward. That was the man I loved. Not because he was powerful, but because he had learned how not to use power when love required patience instead. On our second wedding anniversary, we drove to Santa Barbara and returned to the garden where we had chosen each other without contracts. The same strings of lights hung between the trees. The same Pacific air moved through the branches. Mason brought one small box. "How much?" I asked immediately. $29. "You are improving." Inside was a simple silver key. I looked at him suspiciously. "What did you buy?" "Nothing." "Mason." He smiled. "It is the key to a room at the new treatment center." The trust had opened its first permanent patient resource center that month. One room had been set aside as a quiet space for Omegas waiting for appointments, paperwork, or medication approval. Mason had asked the board to let me design it. No cameras. No plaque with our names. Just comfortable chairs, free coffee, privacy, and shelves filled with information written in plain language. "You remembered what waiting rooms used to feel like for me," I said. "You told me once that the worst part was feeling like your future belonged to whoever was behind the desk." He paused. I thought maybe the room should feel different. That was when I understood that he was still spoiling me, just in the only way that mattered now. He paid attention. That evening, we sat beneath the oak tree while the sky turned orange over the ocean. I thought about the version of myself who had walked into that conference room with 12 days of medication left and enough fear to make a stranger's contract look like salvation. I had believed security meant finding someone powerful enough to protect me. I had been wrong. Real security was having choices. Real care was being helped without being controlled. Real love was not a cage made comfortable by money, status, or promises. It was a door that stayed open and a person who still hoped you would choose to remain. Mason reached for my hand, then stopped halfway, an old habit he had never lost. Even after 2 years, he still waited. I turned my palm upward. He smiled and laced his fingers through mine. "Do you ever regret meeting me?" he asked. "Constantly." His eyes widened. I laughed. "Especially every time you touch bakery equipment." He leaned back with exaggerated offense. "I have improved. You once burned a mixer." "That was an electrical misunderstanding." I rested my head against his shoulder. "No, Mason. I do not regret it." The truth was simple. I would never be grateful for the fear that brought me to him, but I was grateful for what we chose after the fear was gone. A contract introduced us. Freedom made us stay. And love became real only when neither of us needed the other to survive. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of our story. If you had been in my place, would you have signed that first marriage contract, or would you have walked away from Mason Reed before discovering what was really waiting on the other side of it? Tell us what you would have done, and if you want to hear the next story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next.